Business of Property podcast. I'm Simon and I've been investing in property for over 20 years. And if you're an active landlord or planning your next property investment, this podcast is for you. Every month, I attend one or two local property events. I do this for a mix of reasons, from staying educated as a landlord myself, through to meeting new property people generally and enjoying discussions and conversations around property and what other people are doing in property. Because, of course, my own property journey is relatively simple compared to what a lot of other people are doing. And I am actually quite interested to hear what other people are doing and how they are making the most of property. And then also some of them is to actually promote PATMA and PATMA Property Manager particularly to the landlords and other people who are at these events. Last week, I attended a particularly informative event, and I thought today I would talk a bit about that event, but also about some of the information that the experts there shared. So this event was a Surrey Property Exchange event, which is a regular event that takes place once a month in Guildford and has been running for many, many years. Back in episode 256, I actually spoke to Richard Simmons, who was running Surrey Property Exchange at that time. Since then, the lead organiser, yes, there is a whole team helping behind the scenes as well, not just the one organiser, but the lead organiser has changed. And the events have also expanded quite a bit since that time. So it is going from strength to strength every month. So the most recent event, it was a panel discussion on the Renters' Rights Bill, which is, of course, the new legislation that is working its way through Parliament at the moment that will make a number of quite significant changes to the way rents and renters and tenants and tenancies and the whole sort of rental property or residential rental property market works, really. There were 3 panelists and a moderator who asked questions and guided the discussion, so making up the core experts within this event. And I'll go over some of the points raised in a moment. But first, I thought it'd be worth mentioning the people on the panel and sort of giving you an idea of who it was who was actually there. So the moderator was Louise Reynolds from Property Venture, who provides property investment support generally, but also sort of with a slight specialism in overseas investors. Then the panel of Renters' Rights Bill experts were, this is just in alphabetical order for simplicity, Anna Hughes from Woodstock Legal Services, Peter Littlewood from iHouse Landlord Association, and Suzanne Smith, a solicitor and landlord who runs theindependentlandlord.com, which is sort of specifically her website and mostly a blog that she posts. They were and are all clearly very knowledgeable on and have been staying up to date on the Renters' Rights Bill. But I'd like to especially call out Suzanne's website, as she's writing and freely publishing a lot of fantastic and detailed information about the Renters' Rights Bill. So its current status and how it's progressing and how it's changing as time moves on. The others do have some bits of information available and things, but I think really for landlords, the information on Suzanne's site is an excellent starting point, or indeed a finishing point as well on this particular topic. So I really highly recommend that you visit her site for all the extra details that I'm not going to cover today. Links for Suzanne and the others will be in the show notes for this episode. So I've obviously mentioned Suzanne's web address. You don't need to try and remember it. Just have a look in the show notes or in the YouTube description, and you will find those links there. So what were the headlines? and sort of key points that I took away from this recent event, the Surrey Property Exchange event. Well, I think most importantly, the message was, don't panic. For good landlords with well-run properties and good business practices, none of the changes should be too scary. Although one possible exception, the panel pointed out, is student landlords. There are currently some exceptions for purpose-built student accommodation and the business landlords around that. But otherwise, the lack of fixed-term student contracts might create some problems for the student rental business model. The discussion didn't go into enormous depth in this area, but it's certainly something to bear in mind. If you are a student landlord, you probably do need to do an extra little bit of research and thinking about how the change in this law is going to affect your business and your sort of business model. But something I should perhaps have mentioned earlier, actually, this is all discussing the bill as it currently is, or in fact, as it was a week or two ago now, and it's not finalised yet. Things may still change. In fact, I would go so far as to say things will still change before this actually becomes finalised as a law. Hence, why it is really worth keeping an eye on Suzanne's blog for updates and extra information as things do progress. Under the law, though, there will be no fixed-term tenancies, hence the issue for student landlords. A new tenancy will always be rolling right from the start. So there'll be no initial 6 months or 12 months when no one can give notice to terminate that tenancy. Instead, tenants will always, even from the first day, be able to give 2 months' notice to leave. This might sound a bit scary, but in reality, I don't think it is. And I think the panel were making this point as well. Generally speaking, tenants start a tenancy because they want to live there. And most people don't want to move all that often. Right now, if a tenant signed a 6-month tenancy, but 2 months later they emptied the property and handed back the keys because they needed to move on or even just wanted to move on, would it actually really be worth the effort to chase them for 4 months of rent? Probably not. For most properties, I mean, obviously at very high-end properties, the situation might be different, but generally speaking, if you're renting a room or even renting a whole house, the amount of rent you'd be looking at really probably isn't worth the effort and the hassle and the cost of trying to go through courts and to get that rent back from the tenants, especially seeing as you have an empty property, you may as well just rent it out again. And in the new setup, the new environment, the tenants would at least give you notice. So you'd have those 2 months to start looking for a new tenant so you could line it up. In the current situation, if they were needing to do this, there's actually a reasonable chance they wouldn't tell you about it. And they might actually just drop that sort of empty property on you at the last minute so that you can't try and stop them or cause difficulties with that change. So on the other side, landlords will always need to have and give a reason for ending a tenancy. So there won't be an opportunity for a landlord to end the tenancy after 6 or 12 months, or if you let it go onto a rolling contract after that with a certain amount of notice, and have that tenancy always automatically end, which is how the Section 21 notices work at the moment. Instead, going forwards, you will still be able to end a tenancy. You will still have lots of reasons or lots of potential reasons to use to end a tenancy. You will have to be sure that they are the correct reasons, because you will have to explain them to a court. You will have to back them up. You will have to be certain and honest and truthful in your actions. But that's not really a bad thing. The process will likely always include a court, though, or maybe something similar, a tribunal or something along those lines. And looking at the courts and how they're coping with things currently, this may be a point of concern. In fact, I think the panelists were pretty confident that it would be a point of concern. There were no shortage of horror stories from the panelists around evictions under the current system and coping with the current sort of load on the courts as it is at the minute. Never mind what they were then expecting ahead as things changed and evolved and required more court time. However, one thing I noted from what they were saying, in fact, I'm not sure I really needed to note it, I think they were quite explicit in stating this, was that many problems with evictions currently are actually down to landlords or agents not following required processes correctly. And hence, they were actually sort of progressing along the path through the courts and things, only to then be sent back to the beginning, if you like, and hence having difficulties there and creating extra load on the system, as well as on the landlords, and the delays and everything else along with that. So either when the tenancy was being set up, or perhaps some point during the tenancy, or indeed as part of the eviction process itself to try and end the tenancy, there were issues occurring all along the way. So in the current system, or especially in the new system as it ends up being, you will need to be informed throughout the tenancy process. You'll need to make sure you've got everything covered and quite possibly use professional, experienced help where appropriate, whether that be to make sure you've got everything correct when you're setting up a tenancy, or whether it's to make sure you've filled in all of the forms and completed all the processes required when you start an eviction process. But of course, really, you want to be avoiding any kind of eviction processes at all, or indeed avoiding the need for such. Generally speaking, as landlords, we are trying to provide good homes for people that they will want to stay in and continue renting for the long term, as that generally works better as a business model. So to work towards that, there were a couple of key points of advice from the panel. And these were really choose your tenants very carefully. They mentioned things around making sure you do in-depth checks, probably meet the tenants yourself. Don't just take an agent's word for it. Actually do some homework yourself and some effort towards validating the tenants and being sure that you're comfortable with them, even if it is actually going to be agents who are looking after your property in the future. And don't be afraid to say no if the potential tenants that you're being presented with aren't right. It would probably be better to have a slightly longer void, a longer gap between tenants, and to get the right tenants, to get good tenants that will be there and stay there for the long term and support your property and your business in a better way. Secondly, probably take out rent guarantee insurance. So I think rent guarantee insurance, from my personal point of view, I've always thought this is probably quite a good idea if you have a smaller portfolio, if you've just got one or two properties, because if you lose the income from 100% or 50% of your portfolio, then that's a very significant amount. As your portfolio gets larger, perhaps you can manage without rent guarantee insurance because you're sort of covered by the number of properties you've got and the hope that they won't all be having problems at the same time. But in the new world, where all tenancy evictions are expected to take longer than they currently do, then perhaps you need to actually have that extra layer of insurance and protection, especially if the legal effort to complete that eviction is going to be higher and require specialists along the way, which of course will have a higher cost. So moving on to a few more other things to try and mention and get in before I finish this episode. There will be new compliance requirements. Things like registering with a national landlord database, always advertising the rent amount. That's fairly common, I think. But you then will not be able to accept higher offers above that rent. So I think that might change the market a little bit. And there is no advanced rent allowed at all. There were some extra details discussed around these, including the timing of the first month's rent, which I think seemed overly complex, really. So I don't want to misquote anything, so I'm not going to try and provide all of those details now. So without going into those details, it is clear that there will be quite a few small but very important process changes to be aware of. Unfortunately, some of them will also be coming with new fees, but they aren't kidding when they say important. Getting it wrong is going to get a lot more expensive, or potentially expensive. Almost every potential mistake has a fine attached to it. Many of them are up to £40,000, sometimes also with rent repayment orders. So there is a fair amount changing. I haven't covered everything that was discussed. It was an hour long, probably, maybe a bit more, panel discussion with lots of questions and lots of information provided by multiple panelists. So there's no way I could do it justice in this relatively short podcast episode. And even that much longer discussion at the Surrey Property Exchange event didn't cover all of the changes. It's all doable though, and none of it should break a good rental business. The panel was very clear in saying that, and while they didn't discuss all of the changes in the event, those experts are aware of all of those changes, and they have thought this through, and they have thought about how it will affect landlords and rental businesses, and they were clearly stating that it isn't really anything to panic about. I'm just going to finish on the panel's comments on timing. Their current best guess was that the bill will probably become law in the autumn this year. But implementation won't happen immediately, probably. They were pretty confident about that. There is apparently quite a lot of communication planned as part of this, because the government knows that they've got to reach a lot of landlords and a lot of agents and allow people time to change their processes and work out what is involved in meeting the new requirements. So it's likely to be a year, or maybe even more, after the law is finalised for it to actually be sort of switched on and form requirements that must be met. There will be links to Surrey Property Exchange and, as I mentioned, all the panellists in the show notes. Now, I know that lots of listeners to this podcast are not going to be local to Guildford and are not going to be able to get along to that particular event. But I do encourage you to try and find other local property and landlord events that are in your area and go along. Try and find out what is happening in the rental and property space, so you can stay informed and stay up to date as these changes are coming through. Of course, if you can't make it to live events to watch and learn and listen to such fantastic presentations, then you can always read Suzanne's blog for the latest on the Renters' Rights Bill. And she does go into a lot of detail. She's got a lot of excellent information. if you want to dig into the real depths of the changes and how those are going to affect you. But she has also got some excellent sort of summary tables and summary lists of things that you need to be aware of if you want to just get a rough idea for the moment and dig into the details later on as you're actually going to need them. And of course, once they are actually finalised and confirmed what those changes will be as the law progresses. And I suspect I'll be talking about it again on the Business of Property podcast in the future as well. Thank you very much for listening. I look forward to speaking to you again next time.